So tell us where you are exactly and what the situation is there.
So I'm in Kramatorsk, which is perhaps the first major town beyond Bakhmut, where, as you mentioned, Russian forces are doing their best to try and encircle the Ukrainians who've been holding out there in what is probably the bloodiest battle of the war. Russia's Wagner Group mercenaries launched an assault to try and take Bakhmut in August. And that assault has largely been conducted by sort of wave after wave of these cannon fodder assaults by Wagner troops who have been treated as hugely, immensely expendable. Remember, a lot of those Wagner fighters were recruited from prisons to try and bolster Russia's battlefield losses. And the accounts we've had from soldiers who've been fighting them is of an army that just sends its people to almost certain death. Captured Wagner prisoners claiming that they were told, were they to try and retreat or step backwards, that they would be shot. And of course, that echoes the sort of fairly chilling Stalin World War II order, no step back. These fighters would scramble into danger, try and dig their way into fresh trenches. But if they, as and when they were inevitably killed, another wave would just come and take their place. And then again and again. And eventually, what the Ukrainians told us was that eventually this tactic would mean that they could dig in, the Wagner fighters could dig into a new trench slightly further forward and then repeat the process again. We're now in a situation where, after months of a sort of devastating full frontal assault on Bakhmut, which has been fought metre by metre, stairwell by stairwell, Russia has simultaneously launched a sort of pincer movement to try and surround the town from the north and the south. And this week, they appear to have destroyed one of the bridges on the last lifeline routes into Bakhmut. The Ukrainian combat sappers were actually working under almost non-stop bombardments to lay a new bridge to keep the lifeline open, because at the moment, whilst Ukraine has held out for so long, whilst Bakhmut has become an emblem of its resistance, indeed, the phrases Bakhmut stands and Fortress Bakhmut have become a rallying cry for Ukraine. But nonetheless, President Zelensky has indicated in his language that perhaps the time may soon come for Ukrainian troops to need to withdraw. He said, of course, it's important to defend it, but not at any cost so that everyone dies. And so I think it's certainly fair to say that over the next few days, the future of Bakhmut is very much hanging in the balance.
And what about normal civilians? Are there many of them left in Bakhmut and indeed Kupiansk? Because we know that is an area that is also under threat.
Well, so in Bakhmut itself, the local governor has said that there are still staggeringly 5,000 civilians, and perhaps most shockingly in that statistic, he said 37 children. And that is really shocking if you were to see the photographs of what is left of Bakhmut. I mean, the city is in ruins. There's barely a building that isn't charred or broken or ruptured by the artillery shelling. Yesterday, huge plumes of smoke billowing over the city as the fighting continued. Kupiansk is a different situation. I was in Kupiansk a few days ago. It's being shelled, but it's sort of incomparably calmer than Bakhmut. Kupiansk was captured by Russia in the early stages of the war. It was recaptured by Ukraine. It was pretty quiet. There didn't appear to be a lot of people, but there were sort of charity food distributions. Some shops were open. By the standards of the front line, there was some semblance of normal life. There is concern, as you mentioned, though, that this may be a place that Russia is going to try and launch its new, to focus, I should say, its new offensive.
Is there any evidence yet of the weapons arriving that have been promised from the West, whether that is tanks or longer range missiles?
Longer range missiles, definitely. We've seen them in use from the summer. I mean, certainly weapons like the French Caesar artillery guns, the American heavy artillery, and particularly the HIMARS rocket launchers and the British GMLRS rocket launchers, which are effectively variants of the same piece of kit. We've seen them in action, and we understand that they played an absolutely key role both in the collapse of the Russian lines around Kharkiv in September and the Russian retreat from Kherson in the south in November. Both of those partly made possible because of those longer-range weapons, which allowed Ukraine to target weapons dumps and supply dumps and logistics hubs behind the front lines. Tanks, slightly different story. I mean, Ukraine, it's important to know Ukraine has been given or at least promised more than 500 Russian-designed tanks, but these are not coming from Russia. Obviously, these are coming from countries that used to operate or still do operate Russian armor, so often old Warsaw Pact countries. I mean, Poland, by far the biggest donor, promised over 300 of its old T-72s and T-72 variants. Now, a lot of those are very much already in the fight. Obviously, very difficult to distinguish them at first sight from Ukraine's armor, indeed from Russia's armor, because Russia's lost some 2,000 tanks in this battle, but around at least 500 of those we think have been captured and put back into the fight by Ukraine. So in that sense, that's 1,000 tanks we're talking about there, which are already in the fight. But that's not the same as the 100 German-made Leopards, the 30 American Abrams, and the 14 British Challengers. Now, these are the Western main battle tanks, considered better armoured, better weapons, better guns, significantly more expensive, and also significantly more complicated, perhaps, to operate and maintain. The first of those have arrived. The first German Leopards have arrived. We understand the first British Challengers are due to arrive this month. But it will be many, many months before the first American tanks make it to Ukraine.
Thank you so much for watching. You get extra points for making it all the way to the end of the video.
And if you want to see more from me, Chloe and Callum, you can join us every Friday to Sunday on Times Radio from 6 a.m.